Hello, everyone. I hope that you're doing great today. My name is Sophia,
And I'm Miguel.
and today we're going to discuss some of the linguistics terms that are frequently confused. And we think that it's going to be interesting if we first introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about who we are. So, regarding me, I got my bachelor's degree in Russia in applied linguistics. I specialized in interpreting and translating. And currently, I am studying in Mexico. I am getting my master's degree in applied linguistics in English language teaching.
And for me, on the other hand, well, I uh, I study engineering geology here in Guanajuato in Mexico, which is far away from what she studies, but we still managed to meet when I studied back in Russia, the first year of geochemistry from the geology faculty in Voronezh, Russia. That's how we met, and here we are.
And as you can see, so Miguel has nothing to do with linguistics. So what we're going to do, I will be talking about the linguistic concepts, and I will be asking Miguel if he knows anything or what's his knowledge about this concept. And then we're going to exchange some experiences that we both had or didn't have with this concept.
We'll see how it goes.
So it should be very interesting.
All
Stay
right.
tuned. Okay, but before we discuss this concept, um, I think it's very important to point out that even though those are linguistic concepts, I think that they're going to be interested not only for linguists, but also for people who have nothing to do with linguistics and are simply interested in languages and in learning languages.
Or cultures.
Right, exactly. So the concept that we're going to discuss today are language shift, language attrition, code switching, code mixing, and translanguaging. As you can see, some of these concepts are frequently confused. Some of these can be used interchangeably, and where we will try to explain to you the differences and to understand with you what these notions mean. But before, I think it's important to differentiate between some other aspects or some other concepts, such as a bilingual person, a multilingual person, and maybe even a polyglot. So, Miguel, do you know anything about these concepts? Who is a bilingual person? Who is a multilingual person? Who is a polyglot?
Well, I know the basics, of course. We talk about person who only speaks one language, monolinguist. If you speak about somebody who's, well, at least the translation for Spanish would be you already have the bilingual person who is the two language speaking person. In Spanish, you can also add the trilingual,
Mhm.
and it goes on and on until you call somebody well, you could call him multitasking or just multilingual person.
Very good, Miguel. You actually have a very good knowledge of this concept. Exactly. So I like how you started with a monolingual person. So monolingual is obviously a person who only speaks one language. And then if we move to a bilingual person, so there are different definitions provided by different scholars as if it's enough for a person to have productive skills in these languages, or if it's productive and receptive, if it's only receptive skills, So speaking um, simpler, some scholars say that a bilingual person is only a person who can speak two languages. But there are some other scholars who say that it's enough to be able to understand two languages in
With that
order.
meaning that knowing more than two languages, well, so it's better to know only to be better in two languages than just know two languages and just a little bit of other.
No, what I'm trying to say is that there are different definitions provided about what it means to be a bilingual person or who can be called a bilingual person.
All right.
So there is this sort of controversy if it's enough for a person to understand the two languages
Mm-hmm.
or the person also needs to speak or have like a native like proficiency of the two languages. So with my students, I often get asked if in order to be called a bilingual person, you need to have an equal proficiency in the two languages.
Equal level.
Yes. But there's some authors actually who say that in order to be called bilingual, it's just for you to have the knowledge of two languages, and they sort of leave it to your imagination what you understand by the knowledge, whether it's understanding or speaking.
So I can only understand English but not speak it, and I will still be a bilingual by just understanding.
Yes, according to some authors.
All right. It's easier to say that on a CV, when you apply for any job.
Okay. And then we have a multilingual person. So then a multilingual person is a person, obviously, who has the knowledge of more than two languages. Okay. And if we talk about polyglots, so sometimes people ask them, what is the difference between a multilingual and a polyglot? Well, a polyglot is usually someone who speaks or who can speak or has the knowledge of more than five languages. And but that's not the main difference. The main difference is that a polyglot usually has this conscious desire, who makes a conscious choice to learn different
Mm-hmm.
languages because maybe they are interested. So sometimes they take it even as a hobby to learn as many languages as possible throughout their life.
Let's see.
And multilinguals, on the other hand, it happens sort of accidentally.
You were born in a family with different languages, in a country with a different language, so on.
Exactly, Miguel. Yes, you're so right. So then here it depends on the context. So you don't really make a decision to learn the languages or to speak those languages. It just happens because of your surrounding, because of your context where
You
you
were
were
just
born.
lucky.
Yeah, you can say that. So maybe you have a multilingual family, or maybe you live in a multilingual society, and that's how you become a multilingual speaker.
As we usually think about Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, exactly. Very good. But it's funny that people always like the first thing that comes to their mind is usually Europe. But regarding Mexico, it can be also like that if we take into consideration the indigenous languages. There can be people, who were born in those indigenous families and then they have to also speak Spanish
Mm-hmm.
and Spanish and English.
Or those who go as we call it, over the border, and they
Mhm.
are Indians, yeah, but they still have to learn the English language, and they are still in the U.S. With the parents, they learn their indigenous language and the Spanish also, which they also sometimes practice. Or at least I've seen those cases.
Yes. Okay. So these people are usually the people who are facing these concepts that we're going to discuss right now. And I would like to start with language shift. Do you know anything about language shift,
No
Miguel?
idea.
Okay, so a language shift is essentially a shift. So, for some reason, a person um, moves from speaking language A to speaking language B.
Mm-hmm.
And before, in the very beginning, language shift was first investigated in the context of big societies, communities, even countries. And I think an example that is familiar to both of us, and the first one that comes to my mind, is a language shift that happened after the dissolution of the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
when there was a big country with 15 republics, and a lingua franca, the language that was spoken
In the whole
on the whole
territory.
territory of the USSR, was Russian. But then, after the Soviet Union broke up, those countries, each one of them, moved to using their national language.
And it's my understanding that some of them did not have their national language very concrete, very very well developed yet.
Maybe, or maybe it was forgotten because they didn't use it that frequently. They didn't really have
Mm,
this need to use their national language because there existed lingua franca,
I see.
Russian. Hmm. And but it also can happen not only in societies, in countries, but also in regard to an individual multilingual or bilingual speaker. And so, if I remember my own experience, I faced language shift when I was an exchange student at the age of 17. I went to the USA, and instead of um, using primarily Russian, or being surrounded by Turkmen speakers and hearing Turkmen speech, because I was born and raised in Turkmenistan,
Right.
I was surrounded by only English language. So I had this language shift from using Russian, primarily Russian, in my communication with people, with my interlocutors, with my surrounding, to using English.
So it's some kind of cultural shock, huh?
Yes, definitely. I've experienced a cultural shock.
Everybody has been abroad and experienced that, I guess. Those who
I
goes
think
for
so.
long,
Yeah.
especially.
So, can you relate to this experience? Did you have anything similar? I know that you've also been on exchange program.
Yeah, actually, I was in exchange program. I was on the Rotary exchange program for young students. Um, so it's an international program. They send them everywhere around the world, wherever there is a Rotary club, and they do they do, first of all, there's some rules, of course, like not having a political conflict within the country and so on. In my case, I went to Kyrgyzstan
Mm-hmm.
was in 2013, from
Yes,
2013 till 2014, the same year as you did, if I'm not
exactly.
mistaken. But in my case, I went the other way. You came this side, I went the other side. I went to Kyrgyzstan, an ex-Soviet country,
We
which,
exchanged the continents.
yeah, and where it was such a huge, um, well, I used to call it cultural shock, but now I guess I have to call it a language shift.
Well, you can, I mean, these are little different
All right. Well,
concepts.
I understand. But what I was trying to mention into is just the huge, huge, huge shock for me was when I arrived. I did knew just a couple of words of Russian.
Hmm.
I did learn to read the Cyrillic alphabet
Hmm.
before going there because I enjoyed learning Russian. I mean, I really wanted to learn Russian, so I learned how to read it, but only how to read those letters. When I arrived there, it happens that not everybody used to speak Russian to me, so I wouldn't understand, or I
Hmm.
would try to speak just like common simple words, and some of them wouldn't understand me.
Hmm.
Not because I was pronouncing it wrong or something like that, but it's because, as you said, well, this is an ex-Soviet country, and some people nowadays they do not speak Russian; they speak Kyrgyz, and some of them, on the other hand, they speak only Russian and not Kyrgyz,
Hmm.
which also was a cultural shock when I spent more and more months in there and meeting Kyrgyz heritage people
Hmm.
who wouldn't speak Kyrgyz because, of course, I was learning mainly Russian, but I would learn a little bit of Kyrgyz in order to be polite. I would try to use it. But these people who were Kyrgyz, I remember my third host family. We used to change families, and that's how the program worked. My third host family, the kids, my host brothers, they did not speak Kyrgyz at all. And when me and my other exchange students, fellas, who were Mexicans also, when we used to joke and say words in Kyrgyz, like try to be polite, we would try to be polite, talking some Kyrgyz words or just joking in Kyrgyz, and they wouldn't understand, and they would ask their parents, "What does that mean?" And actually, one of my friends jumped, and he was like so surprised and asking, "How come you don't know Kyrgyz if you're Kyrgyz?" But then the parents explained to us, my host parents explained that, well, they just never learned Kyrgyz because they've been their entire lives into Russian university. I'm
Okay.
sorry, in Russian schools, speaking schools. So that was a huge um, language cultural shock that I had there.
Hmm. So in your case, the language shift was that here in Mexico, you spoke primarily Spanish, and then when you moved to Kyrgyzstan, you spoke primarily
Russian.
Russian, but
Well,
you
I
still
would also
had
have to speak English there.
English, and you still had an opportunity to speak Spanish because there were
Oh yeah,
some other exchange students who were
we were we were called
Mexican.
the Tres Amigos there because we were known by the whole country, I guess.
Hmm.
We were known as just the Tres Amigos, so we were speaking Spanish between us. In the beginning, we spoke English because we came into an American university, the American
Right.
University of Central Asia, where there were people who were not only Kyrgyz but Afghan, Turkmen, just like you,
Hmm.
um, Russians even. They were from all around different places. They were and they would only speak either English to us because they didn't know Russian or Kyrgyz at all. So we would speak English to them, and of course the classes there were in English.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Miguel. So then another concept that I would like to discuss with you is going to be language attrition. Have you ever heard this notion or this concept, language attrition?
Not at all.
So, this one is very interesting because it has to do with people who, for some reason, um, forget or don't want to use
Their
either
own language
their native language
or their heritage language?
or their second language.
You, could it be as a big example of those, as we some of us call them, mojados? Well, those ones who go to the U.S., Mexicans, and then their childs, they do not want to speak Spanish, or some of them they're ashamed of speaking Spanish.
Right, yeah. So they go through language attrition
All right.
with their heritage language. Usually third generation of those immigrants, they don't or no longer speak Spanish.
In the case of the, yeah, Latins who go to the U.S., for example.
Yes. If their heritage language is not preserved,
I
then
see.
they don't really have an opportunity to
If
develop.
if I'm not mistaken, there's something similar happening to you in your case, no? Your personal case with
Yes,
Armenian.
yes, exactly. So in my case, um, ethnically, I am Russian and Armenian, but unfortunately, I have very, very limited knowledge of Armenian. So I know just a couple of phrases, but I'm not proficient in Armenian at all. So I would be this third generation because my my grandparents actually from my mom's side, so they were born in Armenia and then they moved to Turkmenistan.
Uh-huh.
And then my mom, obviously, she has a better proficiency in Armenian, a little bit better than I do, but not a native like proficiency. And then I almost don't know anything in Armenian.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
And
So
here
this
it
is
goes.
very common.
Yeah.
And it's also because whenever you move to another country, well, now bilingual education is becoming popular. So in many countries, there are bilingual schools, and the heritage language is there is a policy of preserving the heritage language or the
Right.
minority language or
Right.
indigenous languages. But before, there was a common belief that if a child speaks or if you teach your child a heritage language, then it can interfere with their education and with their acquisition of second language. So, in
Mm-hmm.
order for them to have this native like proficiency, it
Not
was
get confused. Uh-huh.
advised to parents um,
To
not
speak
to
only.
speak with them heritage language at all.
Wow.
So that was the case with my Armenian grandma.
I see.
So she had a teacher who told her, you know, you shouldn't speak Armenian with your children, otherwise they will never have native like proficiency in
In
Russian.
Russian. Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard that, and so it's like in countries like in the ex-Soviet, like in my case, Kyrgyzstan.
Mm-hmm.
I used to hear a lot that for those who were Russian heritage people or friends that I had, they told me that they need to learn Kyrgyz, or they did know or learn Kyrgyz, even though they lived in the capital. Everybody was speaking Russian. Everything was written in Russian in the stores and so, or most likely. But they said that they need to learn Kyrgyz, especially those who study politics, because
Mm-hmm.
they and economy, because all the official documents were written now with there was a policy made by the government that now all official documents must be written in the national language.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. But sometimes, language attrition can be not only the result of the lack of communication um, in that language
Hmm.
and this gradual um, forgetness of the language, but it could be also connected to some negative experiences
Mm-hmm.
connected to the language. So there were a lot of Jewish people who lived in Germany, and
Right.
when during the World War II, there was um, they had a lot of negative
Of
experiences.
course. Of course.
Say, putting it nicely, right? Because um, there was a genocide against Jewish people in Germany during the World War II. And as a result, even though they knew German, they didn't really want to use it because of these negative experiences that they had.
Right. I think the same thing happened well, back when I was in exchange, I remember is when the whole conflict back in Ukraine started. When I remember hearing the news when the president was invited to the European Union, they actually were thinking about it because they always wanted it. The country was divided, and because they were sort of not in a whole completely conflict, but they had some differences with the Russian. They would decided to make only the Ukrainian language as the official. Some people I remember they were interviewing them on the TV and they were not happy with that decision. They wanted their kids to learn Russian because they saw that as a more uh, useful language.
Mm-hmm.
But the other ones, on the other hand, those who were agreeing and those who really didn't like the Russian um, or the Soviet heritage, as we could call it, they were like, yeah, we should not, we should no longer be connected to Russia. We should be independent from them. We should be, they had like bad experience of, so you could see or you could hear that they felt they had a bad experience with the Russian culture, let's call it, or politically talking with Russia, just let's say that.
Right, exactly. Definitely, this created um, this hatred even between the two countries and two nationalities, unfortunately, which is very sad because there's a lot
They
in
share
common. They
history
share history, they share culture,
and
some
they share
culture.
language. It's
Well, they're
literally is.
different
I know
languages,
it's different language, but I remember when
but
you're a
they're
foreigner, you
similar.
can hear that it's the same.
You can
Well, not the
understand
same.
some of the
Sorry, it's
words.
literally like very very close.
Very, very similar languages. Yes. Well, because they also come from the same language family as,
Yeah,
for example, Spanish and Portuguese. And you can
Italian.
also understand each other, even though it's a
Oh
different
well,
language.
well we could say maybe depends.
Right. So then I would like to move to the three concepts that are very connected: code switching, translanguaging, and code mixing.
Some stuff. What is that?
So code switching and translanguaging actually is used sometimes interchangeably by some of the authors, but some other scholars really like to separate these two concepts.
I see.
But if you ask me, I think they're essentially looking at the same situation from different perspectives.
Hmm.
So, if we talk about code switching, it means to switch or to change from using one language to using another language. And this can happen within the same discourse, So, for example, it could be that, I'm telling you one sentence in one language, then another sentence in another language. And while we're speaking, we're changing several times the language.
Right.
But it could be also uh, not only languages, but it could be also registers, different registers, or different variations of the same language. So it could be, mixing between or switching between American English and British English. This could be also called code switching.
So for a simple mortal like me, with that you mean like the accents?
Not really.
All right.
So here we talk about different, well, you could say maybe in some context that accents, sometimes they're referred to as accents, but they're essentially different variations of the same language.
I see.
Like we have British English, Australian English, American English, and so on, but
But
it's
it's
still
nothing.
English.
But it's nothing compared with, for example, the German, and their many different dialects that they have around Germany, as they call it. It's nothing compared with that. It's just like the same language with different variations. That's what you're meaning, right?
Right. But it could be also, well, different dialects also. If you change from using one dialect to another, it will also be called code switching, or even registers. So you start with using
I see.
spoken English, and then you move to using academic English or technical English. So that could be also referred to as code switching in this case. So it's not all
Okay.
only languages, as you can see.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we talk about translanguaging, this is a very very new concept, and it also has to do with changing languages, but because of this globalization and because of the discrimination between the languages, because we have some prestigious languages,
Oh, all right. Well, what are
right?
those?
Like, for example, English or Spanish or French, Italian,
Chinese.
Russian, Chinese. So these sometimes can be called prestigious languages. And then we have indigenous languages, for example, that are usually discriminated against.
And what about those who are not indigenous? But they're just not that popular.
Right, yes. So there are some countries that, for maybe economical reasons, gained power,
All right.
and they became languages of power.
Oh,
And now, with this tendency to bilingual education, we're talking about um, this importance of treating all the languages equally, and not,
mm,
whenever we talk about bilingual education, not only talking about the importance of knowing prestigious languages, but also that the minority languages or indigenous languages should be preserved, and they're also important.
right.
So because, as you can see, languages are socially constructed
Mm-hmm.
concepts. So they
Mm-hmm.
were constructed by people. People are the ones who decided, this is Italian, this is Spanish,
Yeah.
this is English, and so far. That's why translanguaging doesn't like this discrimination. And it doesn't look at languages as social constructs, but it looks at a linguistic repertoire of an individual person, of a speaker. So it doesn't look at languages as much, but it looks at speakers and their linguistic repertoire.
Mm. So when you say
That's
the
the main
linguistic
difference.
repertoire, it's like the more
The languages
languages,
they speak.
the more languages they speak.
Right, and not looking at languages as different as very different unities or
Mm-hmm,
entities,
mm-hmm.
but treating um,
They must have won.
them as one, right? Exactly. And looking at the person. So this person has this linguistic repertoire. Mhm. And according to the situations or context where this person is, they are using their rich linguistic repertoire
The
to
abilities.
for different reasons.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Like it's the case of all these interpreting companies now. Well, mostly they work in big countries with a lot of foreigners, just like in the US.
Okay, so I think that you and we code switch or translanguage
Oh, definitely.
quite often, right?
A whole day.
Right, because, well, we should tell our listeners because they don't know, but you and we speak English, Spanish, and Russian.
Yeah,
We speak the same languages.
right.
So it's very nice. And I can say that before I met you, I didn't really code switch that often, but then when we started living together, I realized that I code switch or translanguage a lot with you because
Right,
you
because
understand.
yeah, but you need to have somebody who you can do that. I mean, you couldn't do that with somebody. I don't know. My case, I would feel really weird when I was abroad and talking with my Mexican friends, even though we were abroad or Latinos friend. I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't like to talk to them in English, and even though they would understand, I would feel weird. But
Right.
that's because it's depending on every person's, and also because sometimes they might be slower in English,
Mm-hmm.
so I could see that they might not have been that uh, secure. But with you,
Right.
it's different. Well, of course, you feel secure, definitely in English with your native Russian, and well, your Spanish is quite uh well, I could call it a high level.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, of course, and you are in Mexico, so of course you have to culture hear that also.
And do you remember or have you ever noticed when exactly do we code switch or translanguage?
When exactly?
Yeah, in what situation? Does it depend on the situation or does it depend on the people around us?
I guess both, because in the situations of important matters, we try to speak English most of times.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I try to when I try to get the idea running, meaning the flow of the conversation, keep it going. And if I just forget the English word or I do not, I don't know, I have the idea in my head in Spanish, I just could switch back to Spanish. And sometimes I add some Russian words, which I don't know, they're easier for me to just come up with them on my head because of all this mix of language in my head. So I just come up with that. And with
Right.
people out there, well, definitely when we try to speak or say things that we don't want others to understand, we try to speak Russian and English, depending on the place, of course. If
Mm-hmm.
we might believe that they might understand English, we just totally speak Russian. If we don't, well, we try just to speak Russian and English. Yeah, Russian and English. That all depends.
Right. Uh-huh. So it depends on the context, it depends on people around us. And you probably noticed that you don't really code switch or you don't code switch at all with people who are monolinguals, right? So
Not
if
at
you know
all.
that they don't understand or they don't know English, you would just speak Spanish with them, right?
Yeah, but you could say, I've already known. Here's a question for you. What about those who are monolinguists? But for example, nowadays it's very common to, especially in Mexico, with such a closeness with the US that we have Spanglish words as we call, like checar. Well, not specifically that one, but nowadays it's becoming more popular to say some English words like now it's super popular to say bullying at schools, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like we'll have to say mothers. Some of them they do not know English at schools. I mean, in my case, I with my mom and so I seen that. I mean, then they still use the words like bullying, or some other people use other words like
Launching.
lunch is properly English, but they say lunch, just you just call it lunch, or yeah, those words like more as we call them fresas.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting what you mentioned. There's some borrowings. Sometimes even though in Spanish or any other language, there are words that exist, for some reason we like to take words from other language, even though
Right,
maybe in this language we have those
right.
words. For some reason we like to take them from another language, and then they are called borrowings, like with lunch, for example, because there is a Spanish word for that,
Almuerzo.
but for some reason,
People just say lunch.
yes,
But that's
exactly.
not code switching. It's just the borrowing as you call it.
Yes, but the word was the word checar, as you said. This could be understood as code mixing,
Mm,
which is another term that we're going to discuss.
all right.
So, code mixing and code switching actually they could be mistaken, or sometimes they even, in some contexts, can be used interchangeably. Also, because as you can see, all these concepts that we're discussing are very similar. But code switching can be also, there are two different kinds of code switching. There is intersentential and intrasentential code switching. So intersentential is between, um, so as I told you, one sentence in Spanish, for example, and then another sentence in English. But intrasentential, it's within one sentence or even within one word. So then there is intrasentential code switching, and there is code mixing. So intrasentential code switching and code mixing, they sometimes used interchangeably because they
Mm.
essentially mean the same thing. The same thing. It's mixing of the languages within one sentence or even within one word, like you
Oh,
said, checar or parcar,
parquear.
parquear. So these
Right.
words, where you have two languages in one word,
Mm,
mixed in one word.
right. Very
Yes.
frequently here, especially in Mexico. I mean, comparing with the Spanish from Spain.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So this has to do with the influence of the US.
Yeah, and
Um,
since we are not the original speakers of this language.
right. Yeah, but it's very often that neighbors influence
Right,
the language,
right.
right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Paul, I think that's it, right? I think we discussed all of the concepts that we
Well,
wanted to
you're the boss
discuss.
here.
And would you say that now you have a clear understanding, or well, more or less
Well,
a
definitely, I
better
have a better
understanding?
understanding of all these things, especially all those things that we do, the code switching in our
Mm-hmm.
relation. Um, I mean, definitely. Now, I have something else to talk about in on another reunion with friends or things like those. I mean, it's definitely interesting to know this,
It's very interesting,
and it's
indeed.
something that should be promoted because people they might. It's just as you were mentioning the with the language that it's not that some teachers or some people try to tell those who are immigrants, for example, don't talk to your son in this
Mm-hmm.
in their heritage language,
Right.
like I don't know, Spanish or Russian or Armenian, because you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
confuse the poor kid. I mean, no,
Mm-hmm.
it is important to actually let people know that it's not like that.
Right.
It's better to let them to have a proficient, well, proficient, I could say proficient kid,
Mm-hmm.
which is the case as many people around the world, and some others who I have met who said that I have German and one well people who I know. There's one specific person who is German and Japanese, but literally like 100% German, 100% Japanese parents,
Right.
and they don't know any of those languages. They only know English.
How sad, right?
It's quite sad, but
And
we
later
don't.
they will have conflicts with their identity.
Oh yeah, definitely. But yeah, and more than that, just I feel they're losing here, meaning they could have they had a huge chance to be more competitive out there. But the parents might, since they don't know all these topics, they did not know all this we've been talking about, or they did not code switch between the parents at home. Even that
Mm-hmm.
could be helpful, but not at all. They were not doing so, and all
Right.
those things could have helped the kid to at least say that I understand this, or yeah, I understand Japanese or
Mm-hmm.
Armenian or something. But no, I mean,
Right.
it's important to let common people know about this.
Yes, and it's also because before bilingualism or multilingualism was considered to be or was looked at from a deficit perspective, like it was treated as if it was a problem, sorry, and now it's treated as an advantage, as
Mm.
you can see, because the more languages you know, usually you're more competitive,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
right? And also, there've been different research that actually showed that people who are bilinguals or multilinguals, they don't only do better with social interactions, but
Definitely.
it also gives them some cognitive advantages, and it
Mm-hmm.
even moves dementia and Alzheimer
Wow.
for 3 or 5 years. So
Wow.
there are many advantages actually of being a bilingual, multilingual
Oh,
person.
definitely. I still remember my my roommate back in Varones, Daniel,
Right.
who I would sometimes I don't know where was he from. He would speak perfect Spanish to me, but he was from Madagascar, where they speak French. His
Mm-hmm.
mother was Russian. He spoke perfect Russian. That's why he was studying in Russia. And he spoke French. He was speaking Magasinsky. I don't know how to exactly call that language. Another native language from Madagascar. And he would speak perfect Spanish
Mm-hmm.
because he wanted to learn it.
Right.
And there you go. This guy was like very social, very actively social. Yeah, speaking with all the Latins, speaking with all the Russians, speaking with all the of African French speaking people. As you said it.
Mm-hmm. And he was also smart,
Oh, quite smart person.
right, in other subjects
Yeah,
that were not connected to languages. So
yeah,
it means that languages or knowing different languages develops our brain, and it has a lot of other advantages. Mhm.
yeah. I agree.
Okay. Well, I think it's very interesting to be in uh, how would we say that, intercultural relationship, and I think that we're learning more and more things about each other just by being in such kind of a relationship, right?
Right.
And we often talk also about raising our kids, future kids, and what we're going to do with the languages, because we would like them to also speak the languages that we know, and how would we transform or transfer,
Yeah,
better to say transfer this knowledge onto our children,
right.
right?
Because it's just a huge opportunity not to be skipped, right?
Right. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We hope that it's been um,
Interesting for all of you.
and useful. Okay, see you soon. Bye
Bye.
bye.